Okay, we're recording. So, talk about when you first got involved with the Voters League.
Okay, my first experience of getting involved with the Florida Voters League was 1993. The Florida Voters League was meeting here in Orange County, in Orlando, really, for their what it was beginning of the year meeting, which is in January, and it was a board meeting, state board meeting. And one of the board members, who was incidentally was the president of the Madison County Voters League, which was a cousin of mine, stopped by to visit, and he informed me that was the purpose of his being in Orlando, that they were meeting, having a board meeting for the the Florida Voters League here in Orange County. And the reason they were meeting here is because between the Keys and the Panhandle, Orange County was the most centralized point. So they chose Orange County to meet. And he asked me if I would be interested in coming out, listening, just joining them, listening to what was being said and what they were all about. I hadn't seen my cousin for quite some time, and the interest of the Voters League was still fresh in my mind, because we had a Voters League going here in Orlando prior to that, had died several years prior to that. So I went out and visited with them while they were having their board meeting, and I found it to be quite interesting. And after sitting in with them and going through their meeting, they asked me if I would be interested in forming a chapter here in Orlando. And I said to them, let me think about it. And I spent some time thinking about it, and the more I thought about it, the more interested I got in the idea of forming a chapter. Realizing in the business I was in at that particular time, my career was just getting started, and it had just gotten started. I had just ventured out into a new phase of my business, and I knew it was going to be a challenging thing for me to try and do. But as interested as I was in what had been said and what I had learned from just listening to them in the board meeting, I decided to take the challenge on. So in 1993, I started pulling together certain fellows and ladies in the city of Orlando here to form the Orange County chapter, and we did. It was required of us to get some 10 people, at least 10 people together, and report the names of those people back to the board and see if they would accept our chapter as one of the local leagues for the Florida Voters League. I did that, and they did, and the rest is history. Since then, I think I stayed president of the Orange County chapter for some 15, 16 years or so, and after which we've had 3, 4 presidents since then. So,
You mentioned that there was the Voters League prior to this in Orange County. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
yes, when I got back here after fulfilling my educational opportunities in Chicago, I came back to Orlando in 1960. In 1960, I reaffirmed my relationship with Willie J. Bruton, who was the funeral home director here in Orlando. And he kept after me about the Voters League of Florida, which was run by a person. I don't think they had a legitimate chapter here, but they had people that were involved. It was working with Roosevelt Harris, who was the president of the Voters League of Florida at that time.
And where was he located?
He was located somewhere, St. Petersburg, I think the city was. But he did make contact with Bruton and Mabel Butler and Mabel Richardson and Tim Adams, several other people in Orlando here, and those people spread out and did some work in that area, registering people to vote and etc.
And that was called what?
That was called the Voters League of Florida.
Okay.
That was the legitimate name for it.
Mm-hmm.
Later on, Poole got wind of it. Poole was operator of the president, or he was the vice president, and you get into that with him. They got wind of it, the Florida Voters League got wind of it, and they took them to court to stop them from using that name of Voters League of Florida, because the Florida Voters League was already operating under that name, and they won out, and that happened in, I think, Tampa, I was told.
Well,
and the Florida Voters League won that court case, and still maintain their title of the Florida Voters League.
okay, so the Florida Voters League was operating in Ocala, or were they operating anyplace else besides Ocala at the time that you got the Voters League here started? When you got the Voters League here started, were you under?
They were operating in Ocala at that time, and under Eugene A. Poole.
Okay.
He was the president at that, and still is. Well, he's CEO now. President is
Curtis
Williams out of Tallahassee.
But when you started the Voters League, when they interested you in starting a chapter here in Orange County, I'm trying to understand, was that under the Florida Voters League at the time? Was that under Poole, or were you separate?
Yes, that was under the Florida Voters League. Bear in mind, the Voters League of Florida under Roosevelt Harris had died in court. And that was prior to my even coming back to Orlando.
Okay.
When I got back here, there was no Voters League operating here at all. Mm-hmm. Because, like I say, when Willie J. Bruton died, it seems that everything died. It just faded out. Because I know he used to stand behind me about joining forces with him and getting people registered under the Voters League of Florida, under Roosevelt Harris.
Okay.
And I would pay attention, but never got up enough interest to join forces with Bruton at that time. But later on, like I said, when the Florida Voters League came through here and had their board meeting, it did excite me, and I joined and started started the Voters League here in Orange County.